Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton here with you on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's episode, special episode. We're going to be talking with a titan of a business leader, especially in the economy, the tech, and the finance space. Our guest has been ranked one of the top leaders in the finance space by Analytica, if I said that right, was named one of the top 44 innovators to watch by Bank Innovation. She's regularly asked to keynote, write, advise companies on a wide range of topics, and we're going to talk to her about this. She recently co-authored Beyond Good, How Technology is Leading a Purpose-Driven Revolution. I love that. Let's welcome in Theodora Lau, founder of Unconventional Ventures. Theo, how are you doing?
I am good. Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to see faces, even though we're not together.
That's right. But as we talked about pre-show, that's coming. We're going to break through into whatever version of the normal's coming, and we all miss that. But really have enjoyed our social media exchanges. I've enjoyed following you and all the great content you put out. You know, I'm bad about retweeting all the time. You add a quick take on just about everything you touch. And I admire that. I'm challenging myself to do that, more of that. But let's really quick, as we get to know you, before we get into the heavy lifting, tell us about how you developed your nickname Theo from Theodora.
Yeah, so I think let's start with where I was born, and that will give a little bit more context. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, for those of you who are not familiar, we always have two names. Even in the birth certificate, you have your Chinese name, you have your English name. And my English name is also I don't even know how we call it, the Christian name, because I'm born Catholic. So anyway, so in school, I'm always known as Theodora Lau in my birth certificate and everything. Make a long story short, fast forward, I moved to New York. I was in college, and my first day of class, I still remember this, the professor, somehow he was doing a roll call, and he said, "Hey," the class was quiet. He said, "Hey," again, the class went quiet. And then he said the full name, "Hey man, Theodora." I'm like, "Oh, that's me." He's like, "I was calling you." I said, "My name is not Hey, it's not man. If you want my name, it's Theodora." So that was how it started. And then I noticed people struggle to spell it correctly. It's always Theodore, always ended up with an E. So I'm like, forget it. So I just cut it short to Theo. And the funny part of it was I never had trouble with that. Living in Hong Kong for 18 years, people managed somehow to spell my name right. And then you move to an English-speaking country, and guess what? We have trouble with letters.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I tell you, I hate to get names wrong. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. And certainly when I say it, and even worse when I misspell it. So, but thank you for sharing. And I want to talk to you about, growing up in Hong Kong. Give us a couple of your favorite, when you think back of your, maybe your formative years, what were some of your favorite memories of growing up in that special place?
Well, it's always a lot of people, a lot of buildings. Things don't close, right? The notion of after 5 o'clock cities turned into kind of quiet.
Right.
Desert places is odd. And I was spoiled. I didn't even know how privileged we were to be living in a place where things is always running, is always humming. You can always get food at night, and doesn't matter if it's Monday or Sunday. Places don't close. But I think what I miss too is little things, right? Everyone, when they grow up, they have little things they remember. My flat was very small because, space is very limited in Hong Kong. But I would always have my Lego sets, in case people can't tell in the background. I loved space Lego. That's one of my favorite. I always had puzzles. And my father, he would frame the puzzles for me to put them on the wall. And then my other favorite thing, which I'm trying to instill on my children, is bookstores. I would go to a bookstore every weekend. And every weekend I get to pick a book. And so I'm the only child. And so my weekends are playing with puzzles, Legos, or reading. And it's fun. I actually never missed not having a sibling. It was a very strange thing. People always ask me, like, "Oh, well, but you don't have a sibling growing up. What do you do?" I was fine and happy.
Legos and books and puzzles. Well, you alluded to what's behind you. So to our listeners that may be listening to this audio replay, not only is there a gorgeous Lego edition of the Millennium Falcon, which is massive, it's not far from scale, but you also have this wonderful, really cool picture of the Death Star, which is really cool. So clearly, you're not only a Lego fan but a Star Wars fan, and I bet you alluded to your children pre-show. How many children do you have?
I have a boy and a girl. Yes.
And their ages are pretty young, you mentioned.
Yeah, they are 8 and 11. So the past year has been a challenge, almost like a massive social experiment, if you want to call it that.
On a big scale. Well, one last question, and then I want to shift gears over to your education. Have they developed and followed your love for all things Star Wars and Legos?
Absolutely. That's a prerequisite for being in the house. And we have so many Lego sets and so many things at home, especially through the last year, since we aren't able to go out and socialize. So we just keep collecting all these Lego sets, and they're everywhere now. We have Star Destroyer, we have A-Wing, we have a ton of other stuff, space stuffs, you name it. It's overrunning the house. I cannot wait to be outside again.
Hey, I'm with you. It's the simple things we miss so much. Sharing a cup of coffee in person and talking about last night's game or the news story here, or just people watching, frankly, in person with the hustle bustle that you alluded to. Now, let's see here. You majored in chemical engineering in school. So why chemical engineering for you, Theo?
Ooh, that is a renegade story. So backdrop. I was in an all-girls Catholic school for 12 years, okay? All-girls Catholic school. Needless to say, the focus is on being obedient, following the rules, and being good at your, homework and all of that. I was so preoccupied of doing everything else, but I was in the debate team, I was doing the student council, I was volunteering, I was doing all kinds of things except studying in my last year. And I flunked my physics. Not only did I flunk my physics, the teacher actually knew my father, made it worse. And he said it. I still remember this. He asked me to stand up in front of the whole class. And he said, "You are so bad at your physics. You will never, ever be an engineer."
Wow.
And it was humiliating. And I was upset. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Let's go back to all my college applications and acceptance. And I'm changing my major. Not only am I going to go study engineering, I'm going to be an engineer when I get done. I'm just going to show you. You're wrong. And
love that.
So the run at this part, I would never tell my kids because they're going to be all messed up. But so make a long story short, I was supposed to go to Bucknell. I was accepted already. I have my dorm and email and everything assigned. And I said, "No, thank you so much. I am not coming anymore." And I accepted the offer from Rensselaer from RPI. And I entered. I changed my major from geology to chemical engineering. And guess what? I got straight A's in all my physics classes.
Wow.
And I took it back to my school. I'm like, nah. So that's my history of why I became a chemical engineer. Yeah.
I love that. I hate to hear how your instructor singled you out and embarrassed you. I mean, there's just no need for that. But what I love to hear is how you turn that experience into something so positive and a great story and really an inspiration for others. You know, we've got, I don't have to tell you, we've got a challenge in making sure we're recruiting a wide diversity of folks into these STEM and STEAM fields. And stories like yours, I think, is what helps create that awareness and interest into these programs like chemical engineering, which, by the way, is well above my pay grade, right? I am anything, my math skills are not good enough for engineering of any sort, chemical or otherwise. So from the time when you graduated from what school again?
RPI.
RPI.
And I would say, though, I liked my college from the sense of, I think, doesn't matter what degree you get, it forms your way of thinking, of looking at things, of analyzing things, right? So for that, I'm grateful for. But what it also showed me and taught me was that was actually the first time I ever came across bias. Bias against gender and bias against ethnicity or race, because that was I literally throughout the 4 years of my life, I got told, and so many times I don't even remember, the only reason why you got into RPI is because you're a woman and because you're Chinese. And then it makes you wonder, why is it that we don't have too many women in STEM or technical degree? And worse is, why do women drop out even after they graduate and start working? So until we change that culture, until we change how we address this is fundamental problems, right? I always tell people, children are not born biased. When they're little, they don't know, right? They're playing with everyone. They're their friends. So somehow, somewhere along the way, we mess them up. We need to fix that.
Yeah, well said. And that what you just shared there, I love how you champion that in social and other places from what I've seen. So I really appreciate that. There's so much that still needs to be done in so many different ways. So if I could ask you one more question on this. So in your experience and what you've seen since college, and we're going to be talking about industry in a little bit here, but is there one thing that comes to mind when it comes to these, really any program, but certainly any technical program where we're seeing not enough diversity? Is there one thing that you'd like to see more schools do?
One thing?
I know there's lots.
Many. I think I would like for schools to look at people and look at their students in a more diverse way, right? When we talk about diversity, we talk about DEI. It's not just about race. It's not just about gender. It's about the socioeconomic background. It's about where they're brought up. It's about everything about them as a human, as a person, right? I don't like having to segment or target people in just one or the other group. Recently, Stephanie Foster, she shared a cartoon on social, and it resonated. It was a cartoon that has two rooms, like kind of, imagine we're in a conference, right? And it has special discussion rooms, breakout rooms, if you will. One of the breakout room is gender diversity panel. The other breakout room is race diversity panel. And then the question that immediately popped up to my mind is, why is it one or the other? Why not both? Why not more, right? A lot of our work, for example, goes into age diversity, right? That's important too.
Yeah, well said. Diversity in all of its many definitions and forms is, we've got to really open up our minds to that. I appreciate you sharing. So from academia to now your professional journey, I'm intrigued. As I was preparing for our interview and doing a little homework on you, it's so fascinating to see all the different things you've been a part of, and then of course everything you're doing now. So walk us through a little bit of your professional journey, especially again any of those key roles that shaped your worldview.
Okay, so the first thing I always tell people is my background is not finance. My background is not banking. My background is not anything close to any of that. My background is telecom. So that is the industry I spent the most time on before I started on the second journey. And there are a lot of learnings from telecom industry that can be brought and resonates with banking. But I think that the key thing to think about it here, and it's the key thing that one of the key messages I always tell people is, as we live longer, on average since early 1900s, we've lived an extra 30 healthy years. As we progress through the gift of having additional years to live, we need to broaden our minds of what we will do, right? Instead of one straight career path, we'll be taking multiple turns. Instead of doing your static school, work, retire 3-stage journey, you'll be doing multi-stage, enter, exit, enter, exit. Think of it as a highway. And so when I look at my career, I think that was what taught me the most. It wasn't one job or two jobs. It's the appreciation of, I was privileged and lucky enough to be able to change path where it goes. So in telecom, it was really fun to be able to go through the entire journey. My first client was actually Bell South in Atlanta. So I spent a lot of time down perimeter. And so from wireline to wireless to high speed to all the different business models in between, you learn what works, what doesn't work. And then I was able to spend time in a nonprofit in DC, which gave me an appreciation of what technology can do for people if it's employed thoughtfully. And it also gave me a view into, when we talk about diversity, how diverse that is, right? And it really came to light, especially recently, when we talk about Asians. In this country, we tend to look at Asian as one bucket. But that cannot be further from the truth. There are so many cultures, languages, and even socioeconomic classes, backgrounds, what have you. It's all different, right? It is very, very wide range. It's not the stereotypical of this is what an Asian would look like. And the same with my work in the nonprofit. We have a perception of older people, older adults, and what they look like, right? If you do a Google search, if you type in aging, the image that would come up often is that of physical decline. Someone with a lot of wrinkles, someone barely walking with a cane and all that. But that cannot be further from the truth, because I look at my father, for example. I use him a lot as my example. He's in his mid-70s. He just literally recently stopped working a couple of years ago, although he officially retired when he was 50. But he wouldn't stop. He was giving talks, he was writing, he was doing all kinds of stuff. He was so busy that we literally made him stop, because we're like, look, you need time for yourself. And so now he's hiking. He hikes 3 times a week for 4 or 5 hours. He can kick my butt. and then the tech part of the bias, right? We talk a lot about diversity and about stereotype and lens and bias. And the perception always in the industry, especially in tech, is that older people don't use technology. Well, my dad taught me my first line of coding when I was young. And he had been taking apart computers and putting them back together and coding and doing all kinds of things for the last 20 something years. So the perception that older people do X and doesn't do that, I think that whole thing needs to be busted. And if anything, I think that was the one thing that really changed my perception of how things need to be.
You offered so much goodness there. So many follow-up questions I've got in my mind. But your central truth you shared, that these molded assumptions, we got to break them all out of inventory and throw them on the ground and bust them up, because there's so many stereotypes and assumptions and so many buckets that folks want to mentally put people in, right? Based on some things you shared, ageism or ethnicity or what have you. And fortunately for all of us, we're in a world now more and more where that is less tolerated, right? And it's, for so long, it was accepted, unfortunately, and it didn't rile people up to change it. And I'm hoping that in our lifetime that we're going to see a lot of those molds of these assumptions and stereotypes and these pigeonholes folks put large populations of people in, thrown away, broken up, and so we can move on and hopefully reach some relationships and partnerships and tackle even bigger challenges that we're posed with.
I'm into that. I can't agree more, because I think every person is really interesting. They always have a very cool story to tell. There's always something else if you just care to look a little bit deeper.
So I want to ask you, I'm going off-road here a little bit. We're going to talk about your unconventional ventures here next. But right before we do, let's talk about subconscious bias. I try to avoid social media throwdowns and arguments and all that stuff. And probably one of the last ones I got into was whether this exists or not. And fortunately, I've had some great mentors and teachers, frankly, in my career to help me uncover just how much of this unconscious bias we have. If you speak to that for a second, and how much of a culprit is that in preventing where we all want to be?
I think that's a tough question. I think having bias is normal, right? We're humans. Humans have emotions, we have perceptions, we have values that are shaped by our upbringing, values that are created by, who's around us, right? And what we subscribe to, what we read even, right? And so when we talk about unconscious bias, as humans, we're impacted by all of this. And you talked about social media, and social media is a great example. The way that we consume news nowadays, right? Either you read through newspaper, which is owned by very few big empires. Right. So I'm not sure how diverse that is, but digital social media, right? What you Google, what gets surfaced is based on algorithms. Well, the algorithms is based on your habit. So when you gravitate towards one thing, you get pigeonholed and funneled into these separate silos. So their intention and their value is personalization, which is to serve up what they think you like. In reality, is because the more you can relate to something, the more you're going to keep consuming it. They want They want you to stay on that platform, right? Because that's their business. But what that ends up creating is it creating different silos of people who believe in their own version of truth, their own version of worldview. And that's why we are so not agreeing with each other, for lack of better words. And whatever bias that we subscribe to, that just get reinforced more.
Yes.
It's the world you see, right? Like, hey, this is what I see every day. Why not? Yep, I believe it. That's my version of truth.
Yeah, that's so well stated, and especially that reinforcement that takes place unbeknownst of folks don't even know that things are being reinforced. It's like a really bad sequel to The Matrix.
Oh God, yes.
But that's what's taking place, and it's been, at least my own journey, it's been so important to really, if you don't recognize it, you can't do anything about it. First, it's like that first step is to understand that you're human, so naturally you have it, but you've got to be aware of it so that you can really attack it and make sure it's not impacting, your day-to-day decisions and conversations and relationships for that matter. So I appreciate you speaking to that reinforcement thought is a really important one for folks that are listening to us. Let's talk about unconventional ventures. It's one of several really interesting ventures, initiatives, you name it, that you're leading. What does unconventional ventures do?
So the reason why we call it unconventional is because we like to look at demographics that people don't typically think about, right? Issues around older adults. In the innovation economy, people don't typically think about innovating for older people or for gig economy workers, right? If you look at banking, for example, a lot of that systems and how they surface consumers is not built to support how gig workers earn their income. Or we look at women, right? Female founders. And again, that's, if you look at, unfortunately, venture funding, that's not, the big piece of the pie either. And so we started this journey because we have spent so much time in our prior years working with founders who do not have access to capital because they don't look a certain way. They're not a certain age. They didn't come from a certain college. They don't have access to the same opportunities that others have. And time again, we're like, wow, this is a great company. And they couldn't get to where they need to be or they deserve to be. And then meanwhile, you turn around, you see all of these other companies that got like ridiculous valuation and ridiculous amount of funding. And you're like, wait a minute, this is not right. Something is not right. And so we started the company because we want to change the dynamics. We want to create conversation and we want to create opportunities. And one of the first things that we saw, and it's still very real, especially even with COVID, and I would say even more so with COVID, is representation. Representation matters. We talk about that a lot. But practically, what does it mean? It means that we need people on stage. We need people to be visible to others. The reason that the way you and I are able to do this is a privilege. It's not a privilege that's available to many other people, to many other founders. And one of the strong beliefs and why I spend so much time on social is that I want to bring up different voices into our ecosystem. I want to get them in front of other people because that's what creates opportunities for them, right? That's what gets them funding opportunities. That's what gets them speaking opportunities. That's how people can learn about what they're doing and potentially incorporate their solution into what they are doing in their business. And so a lot of our work is around making connections, right? Connecting founders with financial institutions, or advising them or connecting them to VC who write big checks, or just stirring up trouble. We do a lot of that. And I think in the end of the day is I'm fortunate to have the platform. I'm fortunate to have the mic. So I want to use that for good.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I think a lot of folks that have heard all of this interview so far, but the last couple minutes in particular, you got them ready to run through brick walls. And unfortunately, that's some of what we got to do so that all these entrepreneurs from all walks of life can have the same opportunities for advancement and growth and to see their ideas come to fruition, right?
Yeah. And I think one thing I reject is it's easy to dismiss and say, well, these people, they don't get access to funding because didn't you know, Theo, being a founder is really hard. Oh, yeah, I know. And being able to get funding is really hard. Yes, I know that too. But explain to me why the playing field is so not leveled, right? it's the same thing as we think about the other issue, which is near and dear to me, which is inequality. When we think about wealth gap, you can't just say, well, if you work hard enough, you will get a good job and you'll get a good life. No, I wish life is that simple, but it's not, right? It depends on, from the get-go, what zip code you're in. The United States has the worst economic mobility amongst all of the developed nations. There is a reason for that, right? We need to look back in history. And until we recognize what the country has done systematically, being biased around certain ethnic groups and discriminating against them and stopping them from being able to progress, to accumulate wealth and all of that, there is a reason for why we are where we are today. It's not just about whether or not those people are working hard enough. And I can assure you, a lot of those people work really, really hard day in and day out, but it's about whether they have access to opportunities. So we need to recognize that and change that.
Love that. We can learn and change so much by being true, deliberate students of history and really get beyond how it's taught, but get beyond what really took place and why. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to maybe continue this conversation, but focus a little bit more on the banking industry. I know that you're sought after for keynotes and your perspective and expertise in that industry, amongst others. How does, and you've already spoken a little bit to this, but furthermore, how does the banking industry need to improve? And what are some of the biggest issues that you see?
I think we need to first recognize we all have a role to play. A lot of times when we think about the underbanked and the unbanked, people automatically think about people that are not profitable for banks, or people that they don't want to service, or they think about charity. And that cannot be further from the truth, because a lot of times people end up the situation they are, not because they are not good with money, or they don't know what to do with money, or they're not good people, right? Things happen in life. We all know that, especially for the last 12 months. I think we've all recognized that, there are a lot of things beyond our control that we end up where we are. And so the question becomes, how do we bring more of these people back into the financial services system? And the solution isn't to give them more fees. The solution isn't to ding them for more things. The solution is to think about, how do we help improve their financial outcome? How do we help them to be more financially healthy, right? The answer to debt is not giving them another loan. The answer to debt is, how do we get them out of debt? How do we get them to help them save more? How do we become more ethical in what we're doing? Recently, a colleague of mine shared on social in his report and highlighted some of the banks that made almost a third of their revenue based on fees. And then my question is, okay, maybe that's where we start. I'm not saying everyone needs to go do everything for free. I mean, we all need to keep the lights on, but how much is too much, right? That would be the first question. And then second of all is, we need to think more holistically, broader. We tend to think in terms of products. Here's a savings product. Here's a checking account. Here's a this and that. But we never think of life that way, right? When I look at bank as a means to an end, because I need to save money for my kids going to college in 8 years, okay? And then I look at, what do I need to do to get that? Banking product is one part of it, but there's a whole lot more, right? And then, as we talked about earlier, as we get older and as we live longer, our financial relationships become more complex. So someone like me, I'm in my late 40s. I have my kids who are way too young, but they will be in college soon, hitting right at the same time when I will be 60. So probably I should start thinking about what to do if and when I do retire. And at the same time, that's when my parents will be in their 80s, right? So someone like me, sandwich generation, all of my main life events I need to plan for financially, all of them is going to come at the same time. And my question to the banks are, what are you doing to help me? Right? That is a simple enough question that we need to be able to answer. Can you tell me what you can do for me? Don't try to sell me a wealth management service or this or that. Tell me, what role are you going to play to help me get to where I need to be?
I love that. And hopefully we can continue to see smarter and smarter answers to that critical question. I think I made a bad click on one financial institution's website not too long ago because I've gotten about 35 calls for a wealth management solution, I think. But we all
be careful what you click.
That's right. That's right. Lessons, critical advice for 2021. Let's shift a little bit. We're big supply chain nerds around here, Supply Chain Now, and it's really been interesting. It's been fascinating, really, the fintech space within supply chain, and just all the innovation and the new platforms and the new ways of solving old and new challenges. I'm not sure how much of your bandwidth you put on the supply chain space, but any observations when it comes to supply chain fintech?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite example, and I remember I learned this from a founder that I met in Berlin last year. That was my last business trip. It's been 13 months now. Is she's working with Tony's Chocolonely. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they started stocking them in Whole Foods, and I know they've been big in Europe as well. So Tony's Chocolonely, for those of you who like grocery stores, like as much as I do, go look for them. It's an ethical chocolate. And we use them in our book as an example too, because they are using blockchain technology as a way to separate the clean beans from the dirty beans. The dirty beans are chocolate beans that are grown by slaves, which are still predominantly the main supply of cocoa beans. And they want to have a traceable cocoa bean, if you think about chocolate that way. And so they developed what they call a bean tracker to give them an unbroken, tamper-proof, uninterrupted record of data so they can track the history and the journey of every single bean as it goes through the economic system to make sure that it is ethical. So I love that story because I can relate to chocolates. I love chocolates. And this is a great example of using technology for good in supply chain, which we don't typically think about.
Right. Hey, I love that example too. It's sad to believe that the main supply of cocoa beans utilizes slave labor. That is just in any age, it's unbelievable. But here in 2021, I'm hoping that the byproduct of some of these blockchain technologies and others that allows us to really understand where things come from will also allow an intense focus to eliminate the slave labor. And we're seeing it, unfortunately, in a variety of industries. And it is completely unacceptable, but hopefully technology can allow us to spotlight it and eliminate it.
Yep. Hopefully, at least that will start the awareness, right? Awareness is the first step.
That's right.
And hopefully action will follow.
So I appreciate you sharing that chocolate example in supply chain fintech space. Blockchain, gosh, it's amazing the power that it has and the impact it's going to have on global commerce. Let's talk about this book that you co-authored during the pandemic, no less, while you're balancing your career and your kids. And yeah, there we go. So the full title, again, I think we said it as we introduced you, Beyond Good, How Technology is Leading a Purpose-Driven Revolution. I love that. So first question, why did you write it?
We like torture. No, actually, we were approached by the publisher a while ago. And she was attracted to some of our stories, that we always talk about because we do write a lot. And, she was curious about, the angle of purpose and profit. And she approached us. She's like, well, would you like to write a book about it? Like, oh, well, we write 1,000 words every week. So yeah, what's a book? That's easy enough. And I still remember when we met her in person, it was in London. It was in December. And at that time, all I had in my mind, 2019, gosh, the years are merging. All I was thinking was, wow, well, we need to figure out how to work around our travel schedule so we can write the book. We started writing, and it was such different circumstances. I still remember I have this big map of different dates and months where I said, okay, this month I have this conference, I have this one going. This is how many chapters we should aim to get done. And then came the pandemic, crashing down on us. Both Bradley and myself, we each have 2 children. They're both the same age. And so we had to navigate between how to get the kids settled, how to get them in a new way of living with virtual learning, and at the same time trying to figure out what do we do with our business when everything moved digitally and virtual. And we took a break. We had to take a break because we had to sort out our personal lives first. And so we took a 3-month break and we just did a crunch course through the summer. We rushed through the entire summer. But as awful and still is awful the pandemic was, it gave us more urgency that we need to get the book out, because we ended up devoting one full chapter on the economic inequalities and the challenges that we saw coming from COVID and the downturn. And it was already a theme that we were exploring in the book for, women, for older adults, for communities of color. But I think the pandemic just made things so much worse that it gave us this view that we have to get the story out because we want more people to read it. We want more people to pause and think about what they're doing.
So much ask you, so little time. And I have not purchased the book yet. I'm going to be purchasing it and do my book report. It's fascinating. And I always love hearing the inspiration behind what created this massive project. What's one key takeaway that you really, if folks pick it up, maybe they forget everything else, what's one key takeaway you hope sticks with folks?
It's not that if profits and purpose can coexist, it's that profits and purpose must coexist, and it can. And the book has examples from startups to established companies that show us how, right? So I get so frustrated hearing from people that says, well, but these are not profitable demographics, or we are not charity. No, we're not asking for people to pump charities. We are not asking you to completely smash your business model. We're just asking you to pause and think. We all have a role to create the future society, something hopefully better than the one we inherited for our children and for children. We all have a role. Doesn't matter what position you're in and what company, what industry you're in. So what is your role?
What is your role, and do you choose to accept it and act it and execute on it, right?
Yes, it's a choice, right? It's a choice.
Well, going back to what you said a few minutes ago, can't remember exactly what we're talking about, but we need to see action, right? We need to see action. And we're all tired of lip service leadership, right? We got to have seen action and results. And I love how you put that. We hadn't come out and said it, but right before we went live, and I know this is another thing you're passionate about because I've seen it in my Twitter following of your account. By the way, what is your Twitter handle? Just for folks listening.
It's PSB_DC.
A great follow. I can assure you, and it'll be in the show notes too. The digital divide. All right. If there's one thing we have learned, illustrated painfully, still now. I was reading, we had here in our household, we have 3 little kids, and they had a virtual day yesterday after going back to school. We taught them at home for a year due to the pandemic, and they went back to school in January. Well, we had bad weather rolling through the Southeast yesterday, and the school system chose to keep the kids at home. And just when I thought we'd made some progress when it comes to technology for our remote, population, I saw a note from a teacher that held back assignments because, paraphrasing, she wasn't sure who had, computers and internet and who didn't. And it just really is an email. It just stuck me right in the heart, So pre-show, I was telling you that, okay, it's not this mouse, it's that mouse. I was telling you I was using 2 mice, and your response was a good one. It says 2 is better than none. It brought me right back to that email yesterday and how so many folks go without. And it's a sad thing. The problems here in the States, but it's even worse globally. Before we switch gears and talk about your podcast, a couple thoughts around the digital divide.
I think one of the myths when people think about digital divide or the challenge of it is they think it's a problem in developing countries, right? We don't have enough of an appreciation that it is a big problem in the United States. And it also is even more of a challenge because it goes along the have and the have-nots, right? It's the top 25% of the country and then the bottom 25% of the country. And the divide is stark. Is about if you live in a rural area, it's about even if you live in urban, if you're urban poor. And we think of digital, we think of internet, we think of streaming, we think of Netflix, right? We think of entertainment.
Right.
We fail to recognize that is far more than streaming. We talk about vaccine. Signing up for vaccine, you need internet access, right? The kids being home at school since March of last year, you need internet access. And we keep reading stories about like how some of the kids have to sit outside of McDonald's just to get Wi-Fi. And that's for the ones who are lucky enough to do that. I see my kids' friends at school who are able to get on, but their parents are too busy with them. And so they end up doing everything and anything and without like even paying attention. And New York Times had a really good article, and it was painful illustration of the divide they call it the homework gap between, those that have access to internet and those that haven't. And if we take a step back and think about the implications of it, it's not just about this 1 year that the children miss their coursework. It's about how that impacts their ability to further advance. It impacts their ability to get into a college or a decent college. There were stories about kids that dropped out from college at the beginning of the pandemic because universities are supposed to be the quote unquote equalizer for those who can afford to go in there. But once you remove that on campus, when children get sent back home, not everyone have access to internet to continue their college work, right? And so now you get a second drop. And then we all know how the rest of the story will go, because then it'll impact their career. So the effect of that is huge.
Massive. Yeah, it is a crying shame. And I saw an article, I think AP published something just a few days ago, and they cited a nonprofit. I can't remember the nonprofit, but the estimation was here in the States, 10 to 15 million kids do not have any internet access. And that doesn't even probably touch the families that may have access, but may not have enough equipment and, hardware to enable the whole family, all their students to do what they need to do. So huge challenge. I appreciate you sharing some perspective there. So much, we have so much work to be done. But that is at least the silver lining with this pandemic, is hopefully it's giving a lot more visibility and awareness to, as you mentioned earlier, to these huge challenges right here. And when we assume everything's fine here, we got a lot of work to do right here in the States. So let's switch gears now to yet one more project. You've got, I'm convinced you have clones. Theo, I'm very convinced you've got clones. Tell us about your podcast.
Our podcast is called One Vision. And it's actually interesting. It was something that it started with a coffee meeting with our partner, Arun. He resides in the UK. And he was coming to the States to visit his family. He found me on LinkedIn. He's like, "Hey, Theo, do you want to have a chat?" Sure. And so we met for coffee. And he didn't tell me until afterwards that apparently he wanted to meet me for coffee because he is running this podcast called Rhetoric, and it looks at blockchain technology, looks at fintech, and he wanted me to, talk on the show. I ended up using that opportunity, unbeknownst to me what his original intention was, to tell him that we need to do a full season of podcast on aging and technology. He was like, "Oh my God, yeah, we need to do it. He got so excited. And he went back to the UK. We're like, "All right, we started the season just talking about aging and technology," because, nobody talks about it in fintech. When we think about older people, we think about retirement, we think about annuity, so much more that we can do. And the season finished, and he's like, "Well, let's do another one." And so we did another one looking at fintech in Asia called Red Envelope. And we finished that, and we're like, "You know what? Can we just take over?" So Brad and I took over, and we ran a full season featuring women in financial services, and it has been running ever since. It's been a while now. We use the show to highlight voices from everywhere. If any of us would pay attention to, again, podcasts, to virtual conferences, to webinars, and all of those, typically people recruit names that everyone already see in 10 other conferences in the same week, right? It's always the same face. It's always the same thing. Oh, it's homogeneous. I wanted to run counter to that. Because there are so many smart people everywhere that I want to feature them. Again, it goes back to, Brad and I have a platform. We have a mic. Let's give that mic to someone, because it's not enough to include people on the table. You need to give them the mic so they can talk. And that's what the podcast is for.
Love that so much. I love that so much. And we're kindred spirits in many ways with that sentiment. And I love how y'all use the platform you're building and growing and your influence and your visibility so others and their voices can be heard. And so love that so much, Theo. And the podcast name again, and where can it be found?
It's called One Vision. Now, I wouldn't say it's without challenges, though, because we always got advice from people. Oh, Theo, you should have invited a CEO of so-and-so. You should have invited, this person that you see everywhere. You should include them. No, they already have a mic. They don't need it.
Well said. That's a t-shirt.
Right?
That is All right. So sticking with content, and we'll include a link to your podcast in the show notes too, to make it really easy for folks. So you're running a content factory, right? The CEO of the content factory. But when you're in your own downtime, let's say the kids are to bed and you're wrapped up your work or whatever you want to wrap up with for the day, and it's your time. Whose content do you like to listen to or read or what have you?
Ooh, I don't remember the last time I had downtime. But if and when I do, I am boring. I read 4 newspapers a day. I have 4 magazine subscriptions, and that's what I read. It's all nonfiction. I know it's really boring. And then when I don't want to read a magazine or I don't want to read the newspaper, then I read not like nonfiction books. I read tech book. I love technology. I like the intersection of technology and humanity. So those books interest me. And for the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of time reading about income and wealth inequality, the wealth gap, and what contributed to that. And it's been a learning experience. It's been a learning journey, because I myself is also, like, I would say I'm not as well-rounded in a lot of cases as I should be. There's only so much you read right on the news, or so much you learn from education, but there's still a large part of education that we don't touch on as part of our history, right? Some are not so good, and it gives you perspective on why things are the way they are, right? I read a lot about redlining, about, bias that was historical, that contributed to the society that we have today, right? I want to look for reasons. Why are we where we are today? And so that's what I read during my downtime.
Love it. All right. So one quick follow-up question as we start to wrap up our interview today. We've been talking with Theodore Lau, founder of Unconventional Ventures, author of Beyond Good as well, along with your co-author, Bradley Lemer. Did I get his last name right? Lemer?
That's okay. I called him Lemer for the longest time.
Bradley Lemer. My apologies, Bradley. Great book. So you said 4 newspapers. What's your favorite newspaper out of the 4?
Financial Times.
Financial Times. Okay.
Yeah, I've been reading it for 20 some years. Yeah.
And out of the 4 magazines, what's your one favorite one?
Ooh, I don't know. That's hard.
Or a favorite?
Tech Review. MIT Tech Review.
Okay.
Yeah.
MIT Tech Review. Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's, we've talked a lot. This is a good question to start to wrap with, because I feel like you've shared so many key thoughts and eureka moments and takeaways from the age that we live in, especially the last 12, 18 months. But what's one more? This is such a, well, I mean, I don't want to use any words that have been used, but you run out of vocabulary at some point, right? No one has experienced this, right? No one living today has really experienced what we're going through. What has been one key learning beyond what you've shared about these times, and maybe one that will maybe change how you act or behave or lead, in the months to come?
Wow. One thing?
I know there's 17 at least, 1,700 maybe.
I've learned a lot of things. I think on a personal perspective, I've learned that apparently the kids are way more resilient than I thought they are. I remember in the middle of our book writing journey, it was in the summer, and I was super stressed because we're trying to make up time. And time, you cannot create time, right? That's the one thing that, we just work faster. No, it doesn't work that way. Writing doesn't work this way. And I was so stressed. And the 2 kids, I love them to death. I still remember this. I think this was my highlight for last year. My daughter and my son, they came in with their little toy food, like little sushi pieces,
Right.
little teacups and everything. And they brought me this meal and put it in my office. I'm like, and they wrote a little note that says, "Mommy, don't worry, we'll be here with you." And it killed me because that was the moment I realized, oh my God, rats, I totally forgot about these two. There they were in the kitchen baking banana bread by themselves. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh wait, what is that smell? And then I realized they brought me like toy food and then they brought me real food. And I think if anything, all the things that we thought are important to us, right? Oh my God, I need to run to the this conference and that conference. I think this keynote is important. I need to give this and this up. It doesn't matter. It's your family. It's the kids are all right, and that's the most important thing.
Love that. Love that note. Love your kids baking banana bread, and I love the fact what you shared there. The kids are more resilient than what we all think. And
I just say that thank you for not burning down the kitchen. But
well, and that's good news for society, frankly. They can get through and have these experiences and hopefully be stronger and better, more capable leaders in the years to come. So how can, I imagine, I know you get plenty of inbound inquiries, but I imagine many folks in our community are going to want to connect with you and follow you and whatnot. How can our folks, our community members connect with you, Thea?
I am pretty active on social, as you alluded to. So I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. So just looked at LinkedIn, Theater Aloud, or we just established a site for our book. So go to beyondgoodbook.com. And there you'll find the content, some of the interviews, as well as what the book is about.
Outstanding. Now, I know you can get the book anywhere. I found it on Amazon, but can you get the book through your website, Beyond Book?